Hello and welcome to another episode of the Data Revolution podcast. Today, I've got the lovely Linda McIver as my guest, and I'm going to ask her to introduce herself because that's easier for me, I think. Hello, Linda.
Hi, Kate. Thanks for having me. My name is Linda McIver. I run the Australian Data Science Education Institute, which is a charity I created to build the data literacy and critical thinking and STEM skills of kids around Australia and ultimately around the world.
I love that big mission that you've got. So tell me how you got into this. How did you come to start running this?
It was a series of happy accidents, really. I used to be a computer science academic, and I loved that, but I particularly loved the teaching part, and I always felt like the research that I was doing, which was in computer science education, wasn't really having an impact. It wasn't translating to the classroom, and I wanted to have more impact. I wanted to have more contact with the students. I wanted to feel kind of more, I don't know, invested and engaged. So I left academia when my second child was due because it wasn't meeting my needs, and they were offering packages, and I was having a baby, and it all kind of fell into place quite nicely. And then I did a bunch of things for a while that wound up with me being a secondary teacher. I did freelance writing, I did communications work, I did all kinds of things. But I wound up, as I say, a secondary teacher. And that was great in that I felt that like much closer contact with the students than you have in a tertiary setting. And I really felt like I was having an impact and making a difference. But I was doing two things. So one was I was teaching a year 11 subject of my own devising, which I put together with co-teacher by the name of Victor Rajewski, and we were able to do anything we wanted in that course. And we created a subject where we taught what we thought were all the interesting parts of computer science, and then we got the kids to solve a real problem. And we did that by connecting with academics and getting the kids to solve data problems. So we connected with scientists who had data needs, but not quite the computational skills to solve them, and got the kids to solve the problems. And of course, school projects, some of them did work, some of them didn't. You expect that, and we would, warn the scientists up front, but some of them were really powerful. I had kids in that very first class of year 11s doing cancer research. And,
wow.
and that code's still being used. And that was when was that? 2011. So, it was really, some of those projects were amazing and just blew the academics away. And it was so satisfying. At the same time, I was teaching someone else's subject in year 10, and we were trying to engage the students with code using toys. They were making robots push each other out of circles or follow lines. They were drawing pretty pictures in Scratch-based interfaces, and they hated it. And they were so unmotivated and disengaged, and it was just awful. I have to admit, I hated it too. Eventually, I persuaded that the head of that subject to let me do a data unit where they were learning the same coding skills, but they were learning it in the context of real data. So we used election data, we used data about microbats, we used all kinds of different data sets. The change in motivation was amazing. They were so into it, and it didn't matter whether it was a topic of particular interest to them. It mattered that it was real. And so I thought, this is great. Now I know how to engage kids with code who didn't want to code before. I'm going to quit because I wanted everyone to be able to do it, not just the kids in my classes. So part of the reason I could do that was because I was half-time. So I could use my own time to find the data sets and build the projects and all that kind of stuff. Teachers don't have that kind of time. They also, for the most part, don't have those skills. So I thought, well, if I can build the projects and find the data sets and annotate the data sets and train the teachers to do this stuff, maybe I can kind of take the hard work out of it and make it possible for more teachers to engage kids with these kind of projects. So that's why I started ADSI, with the goal of doing that. Really, it was to get kids to code, but it's become more and more obvious to me that the critical thinking and the data literacy are actually the important parts.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's nothing more soul destroying than teaching someone else's super boring course. It's bad for
Yeah.
the students and it's bad for you. I've been
hmm
there too. But so when you're looking at the world now with especially the high school students, what are you seeing in terms of their technology capability?
Oh, we call these kids digital natives because they've grown up texting and messaging and on Instagram and on TikTok and all the rest of it. But they're not really digitally skilled. They're not really digitally literate. They are consumers of the technology, not,
Hmm.
they might create in terms of creating TikTok videos, but they're not creators in terms of creating the technology. They
They're
don't
not
understand how
makers.
the technology works. They don't understand the risks of the technology. Yeah, they they're perhaps digital artists, but not. They're just not data literate, and they're not really technology literate. And part of the reason for that is the courses that we run at schools are awful. My own kids. One in particular was very keen on tech and then was kind of pushed through the sieve of a bunch of courses where learning technology was about learning to use PowerPoint and about making Photoshop produce the identical image to the one in the textbook. And he would rather poke his eyes out with a fork than do that stuff. And so he hates it now. And it's just, I watch that happening. I'm like, oh, no, stop. We could be getting them to
But,
do
but,
real
but
stuff.
I mean, to be slightly polemical here, I am not a power user of electricity. Like I just know
Mm.
how to turn the light switch on.
Yep.
That's not a bad thing. There are engineers out there power engineers who know stuff
Mm.
about power.
Mm.
Um, and we function quite well. Are we kind of facing a world where we don't need so many people who need the making skills?
So I agree with you to a point. I don't think everyone needs to code. I used to, I was a computer science academic. I wanted everyone to learn to code. I couldn't care less whether you can code or not now. What I care about is that we understand enough about technology that we can have a say in the direction that technology is taking us. And at the moment, we are not there. And you can see that in the response to ChatGPT, where I was talking to a bunch of teachers at an event a while ago, and it was months after ChatGPT had hit the headlines, and they were all very excited about it, using it every day, and they did not know that ChatGPT did not tell the truth. And so I showed them some examples. I went through it. I had
Oh, the ever
asked.
famous hallucinations.
Yeah, I'd asked ChatGPT to write my bio 8 times and got 8 different results with 8 different places where I did my PhD and 8 different topics where I did my PhD, none of them correct. And they were
Yeah,
like,
it
they
did the
were
same for me
aghast.
too. It invented 2 jobs, one with a very worthwhile Indigenous institution charity that I'd never heard of, and the
Yeah.
other with the Red Cross. It's just
hmm
ridiculous. So it's not very
Yeah.
good with truth.
No, exactly. And what worries me about that is people don't know, So the real thing that we need to build here is we need to build enough technological literacy and enough data literacy that people can think about these things critically, and then people can go, well, hang on a minute. How do I know this is accurate, and actually challenge these kinds of things? Because at the moment we are very susceptible to the hype from the people creating these systems. And when we have things like a bunch of people who are senior in the AI industry going, oh, the real risk is that they become sentient and kill us all, which is a very much look over there distraction tactic to avoid us thinking about the very real and present harms of AI, which are in the bias and misinformation kind of spheres. We all need to know enough that we can have that conversation intelligently, and that we can go, hang on a minute, you are spinning us a marketing line here. Can we look at the actual reality of the situation? Because at the moment we're not equipped to do that.
Yes, AI is a little way off from being sentient.
Just a touch.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a fascinating area, though, thinking about how we're going to get kids the right skills. So,
Mm.
I mean, you used to think that everyone had to code.
Mm.
Has your thinking evolved now for the kind of skills that high school kids in particular need?
Above all, they need critical thinking and they need creativity. And at the moment, our curriculum is actually uh, forcing that out of them. You know, kids. There's research that shows that kids when they're sort of before kindergarten are incredibly creative. They are great problem solvers. They think outside the box. They're fabulous, and we progressively through the education system squish them into the box. We cut off
Into
or
the
squash the
NAPLAN
bits that don't
box.
fit. Yeah, we force them into this narrow idea of getting the right answer, and that solving the problem means getting 100% on the exam. And so to get them instead to do projects where they have to critically evaluate their own work, they have to say what's good about it, but also what's bad about it, who their problems. So if they're solving real problems, then their solutions will help some people, but they will probably harm others. So actually being able to evaluate that and recognize that. I mean, imagine if our governments did that, Kate. That would be different, wouldn't it?
Well, not all of our governments really don't want to hurt people, though. But that's really interesting because to me that kind of speaks to using really, really simple tools, things like the Open Data Institute's data ethics canvas when you're thinking about doing data projects, which I'm a huge fan of. We'll share a link to that in the show notes. But that kind of idea of a one-pager with a bunch of questions about your project, I think, is really powerful.
Yeah, super important to be able to do those kinds of things and also know that those kinds of things should be done. So Laura Summers has a wonderful device called the ethics litmus test. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's like a bunch of sort of cards that you get that ask you questions. It's a bit like a card game, and it's like is this rather the big question is this ethical? But the ethics litmus test has a bunch of smaller questions that just get you thinking around the lines of, well, is this the right thing to do? Really simple, small things that just get you asking the question. It's not ethics is difficult and it's complicated and it's huge, but we can actually approach it in a fairly simple way and achieve a lot. But you have to start there. You have to intend to build ethics in, and that's not built into a lot of our systems to even think about the ethics from the start.
Yeah, well, I think that the whole space of ethics, everybody is like, oh, it's so hard. And that's why I like these tools like the cards that you just mentioned or the one pager where it just asks you a series of simple questions.
Yeah.
And if you just think about them for a minute, it really can stop you from doing some quite egregious things.
Yes, exactly. And so building that into education where you've got kids solving real problems and thinking about the impact of their solutions and actually measuring the impact of their solutions, that's immensely powerful. And it's something that you can't look up the answer for in the back of the textbook. It's something you can't get 100% for. But it's a way of thinking about the world that actually has the potential to help these kids become creative, critical thinking, rational problem solvers.
Yeah, that's an excellent thing to hope for. It really is. It's an interesting thing too. I keep saying interesting. It's my most favorite word. I did a semantic analysis of all my blog posts ever, and it is my most used word. But it
That's
is
awesome.
truly interesting. That how we do education for engineers now is a lot of group work, and we get them to peer assess each other. So that critically evaluating not only your own work but other people's work, because that's how we work in the workplace anyway. So a lot of what we're doing in the education space now is teaching them to work as part of teams, and small T teams, not large T teams, collaboratively working in groups, because that's the way you work in the real world. And increasingly, we're kind of moving away from the old closed book exams, which were just good tests of memory, into a world where, if you've got an open book exam and you don't know where the answer is in that pile of textbooks you've got on the table in front of you, you can't find it in an exam anyway. So you have to know stuff even with an open book exam. So so we're starting to shift how we assess people's work, and we're trying to make it more aligned to what they'll find in the real world once they graduate and get a job.
I think that's really important. We know that exams are terrible ways to assess people anyway. They are fast and easy and relatively robust to create and to mark. Relatively fast and relatively easy. I've had some, I'm not a fan myself. I don't miss it. But they're simple, they're straightforward, and they're to some extent what we've always done, and we know how to do them. But they, when I see a doctor, I don't care whether she's got 100% on her exam. I care first of all, whether she's going to listen to me, whether she's going to take me seriously, which is a big problem, especially for non-male patients, and whether she's a good diagnostician. Those things are almost impossible to test in an exam setting.
Yeah. And increasingly, like we're doing a joint precinct with the health department and local area health service and another university, and it's a combined clinical teaching and treatment facility. And one of the things that we're trying to do with that is think about how we can use technology to enhance the students' learning in that situation. So it's really quite challenging to work out how you can use the technology to help teach as well as treat people in a clinical space.
Yeah, it's, that's an interesting problem, and one that we haven't really solved. I went to a supercomputing conference, actually the first one I went to, I think in 2012, and I heard a talk from someone at Intel who had shadowed a cardiologist for a day, and the cardiologist saw 6 patients while she was shadowing him, and 4 of them had the same issue, and the 5th one, to her eyes, looked different, but the cardiologist was in the pattern for the diagnosis that he'd just given 4 times and diagnosed the same thing. And she said, I wonder what would have been different if we had a personalized AI that was just listening in on the consult and was able to say, did you check this, did you measure this thing, or did you ask the patient about this issue, just kind of to throw in the bits that the doctor might have missed, what other medication is the patient on, or, just those kinds of questions, because though a lot of doctors bristle at the
I'm just
implied criticism.
Doctors, especially specialists that I've met, who would not take kindly to any advice from anyone else, not even a machine.
It's a sociological problem rather than a technical one, but it could really make a big difference to pick up those things where we are human. Even specialists, even medical specialists, are human on some level, and they make mistakes and they fall into thinking traps like we all do.
And one of the things that's happening in medical space right now is, there's a lot of people who are working on private closed generative AI and other AI applications for the health space, and they're very conscious it's all got to be locked down and very secure. And increasingly, it's going to end up being 4 or 5 big companies globally. A lot of consolidation, but you get then the benefit of the aggregation of the data and then improved diagnostic capability, which is going to really power a lot of advances. And we're already seeing huge advances in medical research, things like vaccines, chemical research, new chemicals. So AI is going to really reshape the world in quite compelling ways that can be both good and bad. It's going to be really
right. And that's why I think it's so important that everyone has enough technological literacy to kind of to help steer it, that we can go, hang on a minute, I'm not sure that this is safe. How can you build safeguards into this system? Things like that at the moment the tech industry is just running away with it and not subject to much in the way of restraint or ethics, really.
So I think a lot more conversation is going to be needed in the ethics space, and probably a lot more conversation in front of students where they can start to discuss the issues and start to understand some of the implications of bad decisions based on data.
Yeah, absolutely. And we used to have those, my year 11 class was largely discussion based, and we would just talk through the issues and think about, the implications. And a lot of the time we didn't come to any good conclusions. Some of these problems are not open to easy solutions, but to even have the conversation would be a step forward over what we have now, which is technology being implemented on aspects of our lives where we have no idea and no control.
Yeah. So what's next for you and your institute?
Well, the big goal is changing the curriculum and changing the way teachers are taught to teach, and not just in data and digital technologies, but right across the board, that we're actually building these real, authentic problem-solving experiences into the way we teach, but also that we rethink what we define as the basics. That's keep an eye out for that. I'm not ready to say too much more about that yet, but it's a work in progress. I want to really change things so that we're engaging kids and that kids know why they're learning stuff and can see the point and actually want to learn.
Oh, that sounds fabulous. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. So where can people find you online?
So the Australian Data Science Education Institute has a website. It's adsei.org, ADSEI. Very easy to type, but not so easy to say. I did not think that through. We've also
got... put it in the show notes, so don't you worry. It'll be in the show notes if you want to find it. So thank you very much, Linda. It's been great having you.
It's been lovely to be here. Thanks, Kate. And that is it for another episode of the Data Revolution podcast. I'm Kate Crothers. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to give the show a nice review and a like on your podcast app of choice. See you next time.